Hello students, today I will be starting the next chapter, that is human health and diseases. In that introduction I have already started in the previous class, that is regarding good humor hypothesis, and then I have explained about what are the factors that will affect the health. Okay, three main factors were there. One was genetic disorders, another is infections, another is lifestyle. Got it? Now, how health can be maintained throughout the life so that the health is not affected? There are several uh, ways in which health can be maintained. So, health can be maintained by different ways, which is very much understood easily. For example, health can be improved by exercise. Health can be improved by yoga and meditation. Health can be improved by personal hygiene. Health can be improved by eating hygienic food and drinking hygienic fluids. That is water. Then health can also be improved if one has knowledge as to how the disease comes. If one knows how the disease comes, he also will know how to prevent it and how to take precautions to avoid those diseases. And other reasons is vaccination can prevent also. Suppose vaccines are given in advance so that there is no future occurrence of disease. So as a result, what happens when vaccine is given to a person, in future he is not going to get. So vaccination also helps in maintaining the health. Okay. So apart from vaccination, knowledge about the disease, then controlling the vectors. Suppose mosquitoes are more, that would have if stagnant water is there and more mosquitoes are there, then that would be again cause for various waterborne diseases. So controlling those mosquitoes, which are vectors of disease, we call, not mosquitoes, we call it as vectors of disease because it is responsible for transmitting the disease from affected to unaffected individual. Okay, so controlling the vectors, controlling the mosquitoes is also one way to maintain good health. So because of all these reasons which I have mentioned now will be the reasons how, I mean ways how the health can be maintained. So starting with definition of disease. So what is a definition of disease? A disease is both structural and functional abnormality in the body. Okay, which includes certain signs and symptoms. That itself is the disease. Okay, so one or the other structure may be affected, certain tissues, its structure, its functioning. Whenever a structure and functioning of any part of our body is affected, then we say that that person is suffering from disease. Okay, and every disease has its own signs and symptoms. So diseases, human diseases can be broadly divided into two types: communicable disease and non-communicable diseases. So human diseases is broadly divided into two types. One is called communicable disease. communicable diseases. And the second is called non-communicable diseases. Non-communicable diseases. So two are right here: communicable disease and non-communicable disease. Now, what is the definition of it and what might be the difference? If you know the definition, you will come to know the difference. Some of the main difference I will discuss and further tell some of the other points also. So, what is the difference between communicable disease and non-communicable disease? So, these communicable diseases are also called infectious disease. Whereas non-communicable diseases are called non-infectious diseases. What is infection or infectious disease? Now consider a person is suffering with a disease. So this person is a diseased person. He is suffering with some disease. So he is infected individual. Infected individual who has the disease. And this is an individual who do not have a disease, he is a healthy individual. But here he is infected means he has disease. He or she has disease. What is infectious disease or communicable diseases? If the disease will spread from infected individual to healthy individual. But if the disease, suppose this person's disease comes to the person who is healthy, we say that it is an infectious disease. Okay. And this is also called how it will pass. Okay, how the disease will pass from a infected individual to healthy individual is that is by mode of transmission. So what is mode of transmission? The means by which the pathogen, that is the disease causing disease, will pass from an infected individual. That is called as mode of transmission. It can be through air, it can be through aerosols, it can be through contaminated water and food, it can be by direct contact, it can be indirect with the help of a mosquito, vectors, okay, disease vectors. Or it can be passively transferred by cockroach and houseflies. Okay, so that is the difference between a communicable disease and non-communicable disease. So infectious disease and non-infectious disease. Now, first difference. Infectious disease is caused by a pathogen. So infectious disease is caused by a pathogen. Now what is pathogen? Nothing but disease causing organism is called as a pathogen. So it can be virus, bacteria, protozoa, helminths or fungus. So what is the first difference? Here in non-infectious disease, it is not caused by any organism. It is because of certain intrinsic factors. Okay. So it is not caused by organisms. It is not caused by any pathogen. Then how it is caused? Due to intrinsic defects, it will be caused. Then second is infectious disease will spread or pass, you can tell, or transmit, you can tell, from affected individual to healthy individual, from a diseased individual to healthy individual, or from an infected individual to healthy individual. So spreads from infected person to healthy person. Spreads from an infected person, it will spread to the healthy person. So if I say typhoid, it can spread from an infected individual to healthy individual. That means even healthy individual can get the typhoid. Even cholera can be transmitted. Okay. So there are a list of various diseases that can be transmitted: typhoid, pneumonia, okay, ringworm disease. All these are transmittable diseases which can be spread from one person to next person. So that is nothing but the point, very important difference between a communicable disease. Non-communicable disease will not spread from infected individual to healthy individual. For example, if a person has cancer, it doesn't mean he will transmit the cancer to the one who is nearby. Okay, or in other means also it cannot, in any other means, or also it cannot be transmitted to the healthy individual. Suppose a person has deficiency of hormone, it doesn't mean others also will get deficiency of hormone. So these type of diseases which are not spread from one individual to next individual or other individual, such type of diseases are called as non-communicable diseases. So do not spread from one individual to another individual. Here, so with these two differences, these are the two main difference between a communicable disease and non-communicable disease. Then followed by an example, as I already told, you can take an example of typhoid, which can easily spread, cholera, typhoid, pneumonia, plague, dysentery, okay, tetanus, etc. Then next is non-communicable diseases. Many, as I shall give example. One just example I shall give is cancer. It is a non-communicable disease. Okay. So these are main difference between a communicable disease and non-communicable disease with examples. Now other differences, some additional differences between the two. Here it is more extrinsic. You see, pathogens are nothing but organisms that are present in the environment. So it is extrinsic to the body. That means it is the substance present, is the causative agent present outside the body. So it is an extrinsic. These diseases are extrinsic in origin. That means suppose a Salmonella typhi bacteria will come from through the food which is externally located. But here, non-communicable disease is an intrinsic disease. It means that cancer comes from within the body. It does not come from outside and then enter the body. It is already the defect within the body. And hormonal deficiency will be also defect within the body. So it is more intrinsic. Whereas this is more extrinsic. The source of the disease is present outside the body. But here, the cause and the source of the disease is present within the body. Then, another difference which you can still know here, if community hygiene or personal hygiene is there, that means if a person maintains hygiene, clean food, clean water, maintaining themselves clean, okay, So they will use highly clean substances daily, wash hands before food, and all these things. If hygiene is maintained, personal hygiene and community hygiene also, when it is maintained, then these diseases can be avoided. Okay, but community hygiene and personal hygiene, it cannot overcome non-communicable diseases. Okay, because a person might be maintaining hygienic lifestyle, but but what happens? Still, person may have a propensity to get cancer or deficiency or any other genetic disorders and all. So those will be what, non-communicable disease. So community hygiene or personal hygiene has no role in overcoming the non-communicable diseases. What? But however, if lifestyle is strictly maintained, to certain extent it can be avoided, the non-communicable disease. But many of them still cannot be avoided. So basically, hygiene cannot avoid. That was the fourth difference actually for difference. Hygiene cannot avoid this disease, but hygiene can avoid communicable diseases. So these are some additional differences between communicable and non-communicable diseases. Now, within communicable diseases, there can be two types. So in communicable disease, some will be spreading from infected individual to normal individual or healthy individual directly. So it's called direct transmission. So direct transmission is there. That means direct contact with direct human to human contact itself, it can spread. So that is called as direct transmission. Okay. So spreading of diseases from human to human. And the pathogen will directly come, reach from an infected individual to uninfected individual. Another is indirect transmission. So this is indirect transmission. It will not directly spread from infected individual to healthy individual. It will spread through a mediator. For example, it can be CC fly, it can be rat flea, it can be mosquitoes, okay, or lice. So various through insects it will be passing. Okay, that is called as indirect uh, transmission. So these are the two divisions, two classifications within communicable diseases. So direct transmission, why it will be? Due to direct contact. That means there will be no vectors in between. There will be no mosquito which is transmitting the disease, or there will be no rat fly, or there will be no sand fly or CC fly like that. So here, direct contact, to direct contact will be passed. The disease is transmitted. Here, through vectors. The disease is transmitted through vectors. So therefore, communicable diseases further can be divided into direct transmission and indirect transmission can occur. Indirect transmission, and you also should know that suppose so here example I gave, vectors through other agents also it can still pass apart from vectors. Suppose there is one skin disease and it will spread to another person by direct contact. That usually is called as contagious disease, which will come under direct transmission. Okay, so it will pass. It will spread from an infected individual to an uninfected individual directly. So these two are another what? Communicable disease types. So non-communicable diseases. Non-communicable diseases are uh, what do you call many again in that. For example, non-communicable diseases is deficiency. Deficiency is nothing but say hormonal deficiency. It can be hypothyroidism, hyperthyroidism, or excess hypersecretion or hypersecretion of any of the hormone can cause deficiency disorders. So that is non-communicable. If a person has thyroid deficiency, it doesn't mean the one who is nearby also will get thyroid deficiency. So it's not transmittable. So deficiency is one example. Hormonal deficiencies you can tell. Hormonal deficiency. Any of the hormonal deficiency can be taken as an example here. Then second, degenerative degenerative diseases, like it can be Parkinson's disease or Alzheimer's disease, where progressively, slowly the tissue gets degenerated, and what happens? The non-functional nature of the disease starts. That means whichever part is getting slowly degenerated, it will lose its function. So, example: Parkinson's disease or Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease. Then degenerative disorder, the third, cancer. In cancer, what is formed is malignant tumors are formed. Those tumors that will spread from primary site to secondary site and the subsequent sites, which cannot be controlled. Okay, so therefore it becomes cancer. It becomes also kind of non-communicable disease, and it is because of uncontrolled cell division. What happens? The cell will form uncontrolled cell division at a particular site. There is a tumor formation. Okay, usually originating from a single cell. So that is cancer. Okay. Apart from cancer, there is mental illness. Mental illness. So mental illness is, it can be depression, it can be anxiety disorders. Okay. So various other mental related disorders are called as mental illness. It is a non-communicable disease. Then last one, for example, apart from mental disorders, person can go for addiction. Okay. So long before when long alcohol consuming of alcohol was not considered as a disease, but World Health Organization has declared that those people who have habit of drinking alcohol is a disease itself, and that is named as alcoholism. Getting habituated to drink alcohol is called alcoholism. So therefore, even addiction will come under a disease. Addiction is a kind of disease. It can be addiction to alcohol, addiction to tobacco, addiction to narcotic drugs, addiction to hallucinogens, etc., etc. So this was the broad classifications of human diseases. Then causative agent for a disease. When I tell generally any disease, why it is caused, any communicable disease, why it is caused is because of pathogen disease. So what is pathogen? Next. So pathogen is a microorganism or an organism that causes disease. Only then it is called a pathogen. Friendly bacteria are not called pathogen. For example, lactic acid bacteria, which is supposed to be present in the curd, it cannot be called as a pathogen because it does not cause disease. But disease causing organisms are called as pathogens. Are called pathogens. Now, pathogens belong to which group of organism? Which particular group of organism do they belong? Pathogens can be virus, viral pathogen. Then it can be a bacteria, bacterial pathogen. It can be a protozoan pathogen. It can be helminth. It can be a helminth. Helminth also is a pathogen. What do you mean by helminth is, remember? Helminth is worm infestation will be there in helminth. So helminth also is a pathogen. Also, what else can be there? Fungi also can be a pathogen. So these all our pathogens can belong to these groups of microorganisms. Say viral pathogens, it can be hepatitis, it can be HIV. Okay, bacterial, it can be TB, it can be pneumonia, it can be typhoid. If it is protozoan, it can be, say, malaria is a protozoan, trypanosome, African sleeping sickness. Okay. Helminth can be roundworm infestation, tapeworm infestation, there is ascariasis and taniasis, fungus like ringworm disease. So that means all these disease-causing organisms will belong to this broad group. This is actually the broad group. Within this, there are many species that can cause various diseases. So pathogen can evade immune system. So how do pathogens avoid our immune system? Remember, whenever pathogen enters our body is not going to, you can tell, kind of keep quiet. Okay. What it is going to do, it is going to respond to the entry of pathogen. And that response is called immune response. You know the word already have studied immunity. It's nothing but defense system of our body. What? It constitutes what? It consists of organs of immunity, it consists of tissues of immunity, it consists of cells of immunity, it consists of molecules of immunity. When I say organs of immunity, it will be bone marrow, the thymus as a primary organ, whereas when I tell even spleen and lymph node are the organs here. Tissues, it is MALT, mucosa associated lymphoid tissues. Okay. And cells are nothing but WBC is the main cells for defense mechanism, and molecules are interleukins and antibodies and all those things are protective molecules which will protect. And apart from this, there is a physical barriers that prevent the entry of protected. Okay. So once the pathogen enters, the immune system will start responding to it. How it responds? It will try to remove the pathogen also. Then how come pathogens still cause the disease? Because they have a method to avoid the immune response. Okay. Once immune response starts, it can easily remove the pathogen. But evasion of immune system is uh, uh, means outwit the immune system, or we can tell it will cleverly avoid the immune response by the immune system, try to avoid the immune response. Okay, so that is called as evasion of immune response by pathogen. Which are the different means by which a pathogen evades the immune system, means avoids the immune system and hides from the immune system so that immune response will not be there. Okay. So one method is most of the pathogens are resistant to HCl. They are resistant to what? HCl. Okay. Most of the pathogens are resistant to HCl. That itself will increase the surviving of a pathogen inside our body. Okay. Then, second is most of the pathogens are also resistant to intestinal enzymes. Resistant to intestinal enzyme. So many parasites will be killed by intestinal enzymes, but they have a protective covering that make them resistant to intestinal enzymes. Okay, like the cuticle, for example. So here, the cyst of the various parasites, the cyst covering of the eggs are covered by the cyst, fertilized eggs are covered by the cyst, and that cyst is the chemicals of that cyst, chemical composition of that cyst make them resistant to HCl. That means they are trying to avoid the being killed inside the host so that they can colonize, multiply there, infect there. Okay, that means colonize there and then establish the cause the disease. Then some of them show antigenic variations. This can be applicable for AIDS virus, which keeps on changing, and a certain protozoa that keeps on changing the surface antigens. Remember, immune response is for the surface antigens. So this is a bacteria. The surface of the bacteria, what will be present is molecule called antigen will be present. And if this keeps on changing, then immune response also should be kept on, should be keeping on changing. Then what happens is finally the immune system has to become, you can tell, tired to respond to it. And finally the disease will be established. Got? So consider now this is one pathogen. It has a specific antigen and immune response will be there against this antigen. The next moment it will change the structure and the antigen. And now this immune response is of no use. Then new response should come against it. Understand? New response should come against it. Again, it is keeping on changing the antigens. Okay, especially is common in protozoans. So it keeps on changing the surface antigens, and immune system also keeps on responding to the changed antigen. And finally, it loses. There is an energy drainage. You can tell. It loses the wit. You can tell, or intelligence in a way. So in that case, what happens? That is how it will be successfully causing the disease. The pathogen will evade and successfully cause the disease. So resistant to HCl, resistant to external enzyme, resistant to antigenic, not resistant, shows antigenic variations. Uh, so this is how there is an evasion of immune response by the pathogen. There are other evasive methods which will be, however, out of the scope of CRT, like intracellular nature of pathogens can evade the immune response. Next is mode of transmission. mode of transmission of disease. Mode of transmission of disease. How, which are the different modes in which I'll mention some of the main ones. Okay. So the disease can be transmitted to aerosols first. What are aerosols? They are minute droplets. And you know that now COVID-19 gets spreads. One of the mode of transmission is getting spread through droplets or aerosols. That means when the aerosols are created, the aerosols are created in high number when a person sneezes. When a person sneezes, the with the high the fluids from the nasal fluids as well as oral fluids will be released in a high speed, because of which the minute droplets will be created. Okay, those are called as aerosols. So transmission can be through aerosols. Then transmission can be through contaminated food and water. Now, what is contaminated food and water? Suppose there is a contaminated water source here. Okay, and if person consumes the contaminated water, he consumes through mouth. Okay, and the same pathogen ultimately could be released through fecal material. That's why this method is also called, this method of transmission is also called oral fecal route. Okay, where pathogens are released in the feces. Okay, so contaminated food and water also it can get transmitted. Then contaminated objects. Contaminated means what? The food is contaminated means what? It is having pathogen. It has got, the food has become unfit for consuming due to pathogens present on it. So water is contaminated with a pathogen. So similarly, contaminated articles. That means objects here, any object. For example, person uses say pen, and infected person uses a pen, and other person also uses the same pen, and somehow the pathogens, he did not wash properly the hands and he consumed the food just like that. In that case, there is a chance that it can pass through objects also. So contaminated articles can also pass the disease. So it is also called fomite transmission. Fomite transmission. It can pass through direct skin to skin contact also. Not necessarily there should be a mediator, but it should be through skin to skin contact. Okay. So contaminated soil. Contaminated soil can lead to contamination of food and water. Again, it will come under oral and fecal route. It will be just a repetition, so I will not be taking it. So next will be spreading through some vectors. They are vehicles of transmission of disease. Vectors are, say, mosquitoes are vectors, sissy flies, sand fly, all those insects that are responsible for transmission of disease will be called as vectors. Okay, and passive transferers also will be there. What is passive transfer? Is housefly. In vectors, what happens? The life cycle is part within these animals. Okay, for example, if it is a malaria, life cycle of malaria will be present inside the mosquito also. That means there is, the life cycle is shared by human and mosquito. Part of life cycle will be occurring in human, and another part of life cycle will be inside the mosquito. So those are called as vectors. But passive transferers are not like that. Passive transferers means life cycle will not occur inside their body. For example, cockroach will sit on a contaminated food. Okay, and that keeps on spreading the contamination to neighboring healthy food. Okay. Then if person consumes that unhealthy food, that is contaminated food, he will get the disease. But cockroach is not involved in life cycle there. Okay. So that those type of transmission is called as passive transfer by, say, houseflies or cockroach, like that. Right? So there is a contaminated water source, for example, and houseflies are this houseflies are there to do some food material and all, which is thrown or contaminated as well. Those houseflies will carry, for example, consider this as a food material. This is totally healthy, and houseflies come from some contaminated area, and that housefly is sitting over the food, and from there it will be sitting all over and contaminating this entire food material. And human, when they consume this kind of food, they are going to get the disease. Okay, it's called as usually oral fecal route. So this is about the way, some of the main ways in which the disease get transmitted from an infected individual to healthy individual. So where the public hygiene is not good, people use the water bodies like lakes and rivers for defecation and all, and there the passive transfer can occur through horsefly and other insects. Other transmission involves through bite of an animal. For example, it's a direct contact. Suppose a rabid dog is there, it will directly bite to the human beings. Then that virus, rabies virus, is directly entering into the human body. That is also a type of direct transmission. Okay, and other transmissions can also, like this one. Other transmission is there is no mediator agent directly due to sitting beside someone who has a skin lesion or fungal lesion on the skin, and through contact it can go to the neighboring, I mean the nearby who is sitting nearby to that person, the disease can go. So it's called contagious disease. So it's the disease that passes through contact, direct contact, can be called as contagious disease. Now I shall start with the disease itself directly, and that is typhoid, a bacterial disease. Bacterial disease, which I will be taking now, is typhoid. Now, typhoid, why? What type of disease? It's a bacterial disease. You already came to know. Now, which organ this will affect finally is at last stage the intestinal. Uh, Initially, where the typhoid will affect is the intestine. Okay, and lymph nodes present around the intestine, and finally it will go to the biliary system and finally settle in the gallbladder. So it is going to ultimately bring its effect in small intestine. Okay, at advanced stages, actually, intestine will have perforations or holes in the intestine. Now, who is the causative agent for typhoid? Causative agent means how this typhoid is caused. It can be causative agent of typhoid. What causes typhoid? First cause is due to a bacteria. I told you that's why it's called as which disease? Bacterial disease. The name of that bacteria is Salmonella typhi. So typhoid is caused by Salmonella typhi. It is gram-negative bacteria. So you know that there are two groups of bacteria, gram-positive and gram-negative, depending upon the results of gram staining. Okay, so this is gram-negative bacteria. This bacteria is rod-shaped. Bacteria is rod-shaped and it is gram-negative. So there's a gram staining performed. It's a staining procedure. Once gram staining is done, two results will come as to what kind of stain is absorbed by the bacteria. One is gram positive and another is gram negative. Okay. So now we came to know what causes the. Now, if suppose Salmonella typhi enters the human body, will immediately disease start or there is a gap? That you should know. Now suppose this is the first day when a pathogen has entered the body, okay, and it has started the infection. Do you get the symptoms immediately? No, you are not going to get symptoms immediately the single day itself. It will take some time. So for example, it will take some time and then symptoms will start appearing. And what is that? Entry point. Entry of a pathogen inside the body. Or also you can tell once it enters and starts multiplying with infection. The time period between, this is the time. Time between also you can tell, time period between also. So time between entry of a pathogen and appearance of first symptom. Okay. First appearance of symptoms. First time when the symptoms appear and its entry, whatever time gap is there, that time is called as incubation period. Okay. So what is incubation period? The time period between the entry of pathogen and appearance of the first symptom is called as incubation period. Got it? Sometimes it can also be defined as other way, like instead of entry of a pathogen, you can tell the period between an infection as well as appearance of first symptom. But there is slight difference between an entry and infection. So it will be it will be defining both ways. So telling infection is a vague one. Entry would be the better way to define an incubation period. So what is the incubation period now for typhoid? Suppose a person has consumed contaminated water, he will not get the symptoms immediately or tomorrow or the next day. It will take some time for the symptoms to appear. So that incubation period in case of typhoid will be at least maximum of 3 weeks or minimum of 1 week. 1 to 3 weeks will be the incubation period for typhoid. But so that means today if the person has consumed some water, he can get symptom after either 1 week or to some individual it can go maximum of 3 weeks. Now mode of transmission. Mode of transmission means how typhoid actually spreads. Okay. Will it spread through mosquito? No. It cannot spread to through mosquitoes or vectors and all. Okay. Or it cannot spread to skin contact and all. But it can spread. The major mode of spreading of typhoid will be through contaminated, dirty water or dirty food. Instead of just dirty food, contamination is better. Suppose the food is totally it does not have any very less pathogen. Okay, but when the pathogens will start increasing because of insect will sit on it and all, in that case only it will be contaminated. So therefore, contaminated food, that means the food that is having pathogens. Food and water. It is having pathogens to that extent that it will cause an increase in an inoculum size, which I'll be however explaining after. So therefore, mode of transmission is contaminated food and water. That is the main mode. It is also called which route? oral fecal route. Suppose person consumes contaminated food and water, and the same typhoid bacteria can also be excreted, evacuated outside, or you can tell defecated through feces. Okay, and through feces again to passive transference, the food and water can be contaminated again. So it is also called as oral fecal route. Okay. So then, how to diagnose whether a person has typhoid or not? So every disease has a particular test through which you can detect. So that is called as diagnosis of a disease. How to diagnose a disease? Through a test. Or how to test that a person has typhoid or not. So diagnosis is testing. Diagnosis of typhoid is by viral test. This is the name of the test which is used to diagnose or to detect. So when you go for any pathology lab, they will take the blood sample and they will do which test? Viral test to detect whether that person has not. How, on what basis this viral test will work? The viral test is works on the basis of detecting the antibodies present in the person who suffers with typhoid. So, for example, if this is a person who is suffering with typhoid, his blood circulation and body fluids will have antibodies, and these antibodies are attacking to whom? The salmonella typhi. So these antibodies are defense molecules that will attack the salmonella. So that means when these antibodies are present, it means what also is present inside? Salmonella typhi is also present. So viral test is based on detection of antibodies present in an affected individual, present in a typhoid patient. Understand? And remember, antibodies are specific for a disease. If these antibodies are specific for typhoid, then there will be different antibodies for other diseases. So each antibody will be actually specific for one disease. No, it will be actually specific for one antigen belonging to a particular pathogen. Okay. For example, if I say this is a rod-shaped salmonella, it has one antigen, it has two antigen, it has one more antigen like this. So response will be for all the three, and they will be specific, specifically targeting salmonella type. So this was about how to know whether a person has typhoid or not will be through viral test that detects what? Antibodies present in the person who is suffering with typhoid. And where is antibodies? The antibodies circulate in the blood, in the lymph, in the tissues. So the organ that is most that is affected by this will be the digestive system, small intestine, and ultimately the pathogen will multiplying in gallbladder. Now symptoms. Now symptoms of typhoid. One of the classical symptom of typhoid, which people knew from long back, is high fever. So high fever is one of the symptom of typhoid. The person will have a high fever. Why a fever arises? When pathogen will start multiplying inside and infecting inside, what happens is there are certain endogenous pyrogens released. Pyrogens are fever-causing agents. Okay, that will make the hypothalamus to increase the body temperature. So therefore, this is high temperature. So high temperature means here it will be what? Then typically in a typhoid, pulse rate is going to decrease. Low pulse rate. then person becomes tired or weakness will develop. Tired is called as actually fatigue. Here, person will not have the strength or weakness will develop. And you know, mainly it is the there can be stomach pain here in typhoid, stomach pain, and of course, person will not feel hungry. That is called lack of appetite. Lack of appetite means not feeling hungry. Lack of appetite, abdominal pain. Constipation can also be there. Constipation studied in the last year is nothing but hard stools. Okay. Then difficulty in passing the stools and hard stools are called as constipation. Then sometimes it may be alternating with constipation and diarrhea. Typhoid they have diarrhea and then constipation like that. But constipation is one of them. And then comes headache. Constipation followed by headache. Good. Then in advanced stages, there is perforations in the intestine. That means holes are created on the intestine if untreated. Okay. So intestinal perforations. Intestinal perforations. These are list of symptoms of typhoid. Person will start feeling, start getting high fever, lack of appetite, weakness. Now, finally, how is typhoid treated? Typhoid is treated by chemicals called antibiotics. What are antibiotics? They are substances that kill bacteria, but not virus, remember. They are substances that kill bacteria and not other pathogens like virus. It is specifically meant for killing the bacteria. So therefore, salmonella is a gram-negative bacteria. I told it's a bacterial disease, so it should be the bacteria can be killed by using antibiotics. So when a person consumes prescribed antibiotics, when he takes regularly, then what happens? Complete dosage when it is taken, then he can get rid of symptoms of typhoid as well as the disease. So disease is curable. It is not an incurable disease. This disease is curable with the help of antibiotics. Understand? One of the common antibiotics which can be prepared is chloramphenicol. Okay. So apart from this, ampicillin are some of other antibiotics. Chloromycetin is also other antibiotics used in treatment of typhoid. Okay. So this was regarding the disease, the causative agent, mode of transmission, symptoms, and the cure. Okay. In the next class, I continue with typhoid with what is a carrier of a typhoid and a very short note on Mary Mellon. So I'm going to continue with the next class.